What's going on? That's what Wichita police are asking you. Plus, the fight over a proposed wind farm pits neighbor against neighbor in a precedent-setting case. And could accusations in D.C. send Pompeo back to Kansas? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza, and this is Kansas Week. Former Kansas Congressman and current U.S. Secretary of State took a surprising spot center stage this week during impeachment hearings, raising questions about his political future. KSN's Crystal Sherrill takes a look at what impact this week could have on Pompeo's career.
Ambassador Gordon Sondland, testifying Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was very involved in the discussion of Ukraine aid.
This email was sent to Secretary Pompeo, Secretary Perry.
House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff continued to hammer Sondland with questions about Pompeo's involvement.
And based on the context of that email, this was not the first time you had discussed these investigations with Secretary Pompeo, was it?
No.
KSN political analyst Jeff Jarman says it will take some time to see how the Ukraine investigation will impact Pompeo's future.
If the evidence continues to mount, and if Trump was removed from office, and if additional evidence about Pompeo came out, then that could be significant, but we are a long way from that right now.
He points out many Kansans likely not watching every impeachment hearing.
If there is an impeachment in the House, particularly if that has bipartisan support, and then a trial in the Senate where all kinds of additional information could come out, that's when public interest, I think, will be at its highest point.
Pompeo, who continues to say he's not making a Senate run, responding to the testimony today by touting the work he's done.
Our focus at the State Department is on making sure that we get our policy right, execute it flawlessly, and deliver security on behalf of the American people.
And Friday morning, President Trump opened the door to Pompeo returning to Kansas to run for Senate. During an interview on Fox and Friends, Trump said that Pompeo has told him he likes working at the State Department and would like to stay there, but, quote, if he thought there was a chance of losing that seat, I think he would do that, adding he thinks Pompeo would win easily here in Kansas. Joining me on the desk this week to discuss this and more, we have Dr. Neil Allen, political scientist from Wichita State University, State Representative Elizabeth Bishop, Democrat from Wichita, and State Representative Susan Humphreys, Republican from Wichita. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, starting off with this discussion of Pompeo, we were kind of talking about it a little bit before the show. What are the chances? We've had lots of prognosticators, and almost universally everybody has thought he will come back and get into the race. Does this up the chance of that happening? I'm going to start with you, Neil.
It's not clear. I mean, this is a decision that's always been out there for him. That did this week make it more or less likely? Maybe a little bit more, because serving as Secretary of State may be less interesting and less impactful going forward than he would want. But also, Pompeo has been interested in running for Senate for a long time, and this is the opportunity probably of this generation. So it makes a certain amount of sense for him.
And Elizabeth, I know you were making a comment about some of this being an impact of how late the filing deadline for this race is.
That's true. So there's lots of time to see what develops over the next few months, because certainly it's been a bumpy ride, and it's really hard to say what exactly might develop over the next few meetings and activities in Congress. I think there will be very likely some vulnerabilities. I'm not willing to concede that it's his to just walk in and take. We have an excellent candidates also on the Democratic side.
Well, and certainly there's a very full slate on the Republican side as well.
Absolutely. And they didn't wait to put their name in to see if Mike Pompeo was going to run or not. I think they're in it for the long run. But I don't think it was news that President Trump said that. I think there's such a slight margin in the Senate. And so Trump, I'm sure Pompeo feels like we've got to keep the Senate. And so they'll do what needs to be done for that to happen. But I still think that Pompeo at the moment is focused on keeping us safe and doing his job for the State Department.
Okay, and Neil, I'm going to round this out with you. As we look at this race, how likely is it that a Democrat could be a serious contender?
Well, if former Secretary of State Chris Kobach is the Republican candidate, then the Democrat is probably the favorite. If it's anybody else, be it Secretary Pompeo, Congressman Marshall, State Senator Wagle, or any Republican who could get that nomination, then they're going to be the heavy favorite. Although if it's Pompeo, one thing to remember is he really doesn't have control of his brand and his image in the way that he used to, because he is directly tied to President Trump, and President Trump is interested in talking publicly about things all the time. And so that is going to be way more important for how people see Pompeo than anything he would do. But right now, the odds of Donald Trump being unpopular in Kansas in the fall of 2020 are pretty low.
All right. Well, it'll be interesting as we watch the next few months as this race continues to develop. I'm sure this is not the last word we're going to have about it on the show. Moving on, from House Majority Leader Dan Hawkins defending his position against Medicaid expansion to K-State students, to Democrats raising concerns about a complicated Republican proposal for expansion. Medicaid expansion once again dominated political headlines here in Kansas this week. Unnecessarily complicated and expensive. That's how the Senate's top Democrat this week described Senate Majority Leader Jim Denning's Medicaid expansion proposal. That's according to the Topeka Capital Journal. Denning's proposal relies on raising tobacco taxes to subsidize private insurance rates of people outside Medicaid. It also mandates Kansas seek federal permission for a partial expansion of Medicaid. Democrat Senator Anthony Hensley proposes instead to merely tweak the House bill passed last year, including requiring new participants to pay up to $25 a month for the insurance, but allowing the Department of Health to grant hardship exemptions for that fee. Now, you guys have already had your debate in the House. You passed a bill that Senator Hensley just kind of wants to tweak a little bit. It sounds like Senator Denning wants to start over from scratch. What does that do to the efforts to pass some sort of Medicaid expansion in the state? Susan?
I would just say I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's the issue is complicated versus simple. Simple is actually what we passed in the House, but it didn't have a lot of, it didn't fill in a lot of the blanks, so it leaves those blanks to be filled in by the administration. So complicated means it's just giving further direction, and I think that is the safer route to go. I don't want to leave everything to the administration to fill in the blanks. And so I think it's more than a soundbite. It's not just, we want simple. We need to, it is complicated, and there's lots of moving parts, and we need to work out those moving parts so we know what we're passing.
Elizabeth?
Well, I'm going to disagree.
I'm not surprised.
I think what we need is something that's relatively simple, like the House bill, and I have read the tweaks that that Senator Hensley is suggesting, and I agree with them. There were some things that were added to that House bill at the last minute that we were not real happy with. Anything that makes it more complicated is going to mean delays. And we have been waiting 5 years and $3.7 billion behind the curve right now, and it's time for us to get this done.
Well, this is certainly top of the governor's agenda for this year, but there's also been a lot of pushback from some areas. Neil, what are the chances that Medicaid expansion does finally happen in Kansas in this coming year?
If I had to guess, I would say it probably will. And the reason for that is that if you look at the state of play in the House and the Senate in Topeka, that the Senate is probably going to move to the left on this issue at the next elections, because the Democrats will probably have some shot of picking off some Republican state senators, and maybe some moderate Republicans will take over conservative seats. And so it makes sense to have some kind of compromise. And so really what we have now is just the natural debate that maybe we should have been having in the regular legislative session, but we're having it now. And so I think there's a good chance it'll pass. But in Kansas these days, nobody gets everything that they want. And that's going to be true of Governor Kelly, of Republicans in the state Senate, and of the moderate and Democratic coalition in the State House.
Well, if you go back to the tradition of politics I was raised with, that's what politics is all about.
Well, I would remind you that last year we had the votes for Medicaid expansion in the House. We had the votes for Medicaid expansion in the Senate, and it was basically four people that simply would not allow it to come to a vote. We failed by one vote in the Senate to pull it out of below the line and give us a chance for the Senate to actually debate it and vote on it. One vote kept us from being able to do that. So that shows you how four people can hold up what was basically the will of the legislature overall.
But you should note, though, that those four people were likely, I'd have to do the math, probably campaigned clearly on opposing Medicaid expansion. Mm-hmm. And so we've had years now of basically Kansas voters sending conflicting signals to their legislators about what they actually want, and sending a governor who's for one policy priority and a legislator for another. And my guess is we're probably going to have some more consistency after the 20 elections in the next fall, and so probably the compromise will be pretty close to what we would get anyway.
And I would just say we have those procedural rules in place for a reason, because what we passed in the House, it didn't go through the committee process. It was passed quickly. It came up. It was a one-day thing, and we weren't able to vet everything in it. And that's not a good way to pass a bill, especially one that's going to cost our state millions of dollars. We need to go through the process.
Right now, if you are a single mom with two children, you may have, through CHIP, Medicaid eligibility for your children. If you take a job and earn more than $8,000, $8,000, I think, and $45, you're no longer eligible for Medicaid yourself. And let's say you're diabetic. What does that mean? That means either you don't go to work, or you turn down overtime, or you try to game the system to stay right in that sweet spot, or you get sicker and sicker and end up going to the emergency room and costing the healthcare system a whole lot more. It's time to get this solved.
Well, we're going to leave that one there. I'm sure we are going to have some very interesting debates this coming session, and I will have more questions for you when that time comes. Looking at other issues, Reno County landowners opposed to a proposed wind farm are organizing once again as the company takes its case to court. It's a fight over who has the right to say yes or no to wind energy development in Reno County, a fight some thought was over this summer, but now is dragging on into the state's courts, setting new precedent. It's also pitting neighbor against neighbor, as I showed in this story I filed with Cake News earlier this week.
Turbines encroaching on our property line, then we lose the use of that particular piece of our property.
Dozens of Reno County landowners gathered in this room Sunday night to learn more about the renewed fight over a proposed wind farm in their neighborhood. Matt Amos is a U.S. veteran. He says his main concern is how close the turbines would be to his home.
We picked that location was because it was quiet, there wasn't lights, there wasn't, noise.
I opposed personally for my airport and them encroaching on basically my flight pattern.
Nick Egley has been developing his land into a local aviation community, something he can't do if the wind turbines get too close to his airstrip. Both say property values are also a major concern.
We're starting to see that already. There's properties for sale all over the place.
They thought their fight was over when the Reno County Commission voted down a proposed permit to allow NextEra Energy to build. But NextEra filed suit in court to get that ruling overturned.
At this point, it's kind of a David and Goliath scenario. You've got just a bunch of citizens going up against a $100 billion company.
So now they're trying to raise money to pay for their own lawyers, even resorting to a GoFundMe page. But they're not just fighting a company. They're fighting dozens of their neighbors who want the wind farm.
Anything that can help is going to be very good, because it's really tough on the farmers right now.
David Ahrens is named in the lawsuit as a co-plaintiff alongside NextEra. He and his neighbor Gary Tunn have both already signed contracts with the company.
That might keep us afloat for a couple more years because the farm prices are terrible.
They say the concerns they've heard from those opposed to the wind farm don't match up with what they've heard talking to those already living with the wind farm.
I went to the Newkirk wind farm in Oklahoma. Newkirk itself is surrounded on three sides by the wind farm. And I talked to farmers and individuals, and I heard nothing negative about them.
We have wheat, soybeans, and milo. Wind is another crop we can harvest. So why don't we harvest it?
And really, this comes down to a fight over how much leeway landowners have of what they can do on their land. Both sides are saying we're not being allowed to do what we want. Yep. And both sides, I spoke with somebody who was saying we need state direction on this. Have you guys heard as lawmakers from constituents at all on wind farms at this point?
I have not. I have been a planning commissioner, and I don't know where Reno County stands in terms of a comprehensive plan or whether they have worked out special plans for wind farms, but I would encourage them to look at that possibility so that they set it out ahead of time. You know, this is what we're expecting 10, 20 years down the road, and people know what to expect. It's a conundrum, and it happens with a lot of issues. In Wichita, as you know, it's cell towers. And it's very difficult situation with these where you've got the property rights issue and the environmental, don't ruin my property values issue.
I agree. I haven't had, well, I've had one constituent mention it personally, but I think the issue is balancing the rights of two different groups. And in 2001, I think was our first wind farm. We now have 39 with 8 on the way, and it's slowly moved into more populous areas. And so I think getting ahead of the game and for the counties to have a plan is a great idea. We did have a bill last year that was putting not exactly a moratorium, but more on wind farms, and it was a heated controversy, and the bill didn't go forward. But we may be seeing more like that now, because it's also another complicated issue, because yes, environmental because it's green, but what about when they wear out in 20 years? It is a huge issue. What to do with the wind farms when they're no longer sustainable, when that one is no longer working. I think their life is about 20 years.
I think we've also done some things in past legislatures relative, for instance, to the Flint Hills to protect some environmentally sensitive areas, both from wind farms and I think even cell towers as well, to try to maintain the...
I think that was the governor. I think that was I don't know. I think it was a moratorium from the administration, but.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Well, and here in Sedgwick County, of course, they passed a moratorium on wind farms because of all of the airports that we have, but that's really not a case in a lot of the other counties. How much leeway do counties have in what they can and can't do?
Well, and also this particular situation in Reno County is unique because of the geography there, because the wind farm at issue is right near Lake Cheney. And there's a lot of people that settled there and because of particular natural features. But that's a fairly small chunk of the population of Reno County, because most of it's around Hutchinson, and so most of the actual political power is in Hutchinson. But it's a very difficult kind of thing, because in reality, in these kinds of areas, particularly areas that are even more rural than what we're talking about in Reno County, having some kind of natural resource is the way to actually have economic development. And whenever that it takes a lot less people to grow production crops, and the natural gas and coal and oil economy is fickle, this is a way for a lot of people to have steady income. But also it's a way to have steady income that gets your neighbors to be mad at you because they look out and they see something they don't want to see out their window. And
I know when I was speaking with the folks who oppose it, the change that they would like to see at the state level is a larger setback, and the setback to be from property lines as opposed to homes. They would like to see a 3,000-foot setback from property lines. That really kind of limits what their neighbors then can do.
That begs the question as to whether that's set by the state or whether that's set by the county zoning regs.
Yeah.
But also the important thing here for citizens is if you show up at meetings, then you can get people to pay attention to you. And so there are planning commissions that go on all the time and make really, really important decisions for all of our lives. And there are often less people in the audience than there are on the commission.
Well, I'm going to pick up right there. If you show up, they'll listen to you. We've seen some of that happening here in Wichita with the new water treatment plant, and that also back in the headlines this week. With that plant in the works, surrounding cities that buy water from Wichita are wondering what to expect. KSN's Craig Andrus shows us what kind of rate increases are now under discussion.
City leaders answered questions Tuesday about the new water treatment plant. The core cost to build is still the same, and rate increases you pay are expected to average the same over time.
So that's good, and it's good that they're talking about not just 2020 rates, but 10-year rates, because everybody can plan better if we know what's being expected for multiple years.
Kathy Sexton calls the steady increases with no surprises good news. City leaders say it's all in the financing.
With WIFIA, you have the ability to pay off later on. You don't have that ability if you don't have WIFIA.
They told the committee on Tuesday low-interest federal loans called WIFIA have been applied for, and that will spread out repayment over a very long time. Committee members, meanwhile, say they were pleased with the progress and the price holding the line, so they voted to move the project into Phase 2, getting City Council approval to begin the build portion of the project.
Hesitation with this? Absolutely none at all. We have needed Wichita to get to this point. This water treatment plant that they're using is 80 years old.
And this water treatment plant, of course, for Wichita, but it has implications countywide.
That's right, because most of our municipalities are all dependent upon this particular plant because they don't have their own water plants, and frankly are often too small to even to be able to do one. But I'm going to say something that I think my legislator friends wouldn't say and probably don't agree with. But I think that we should pay more for water, a lot more, because one of our problems in this country, here in Kansas as much as anywhere else, is that we don't pay attention to how much our water costs. We need to have a market system that functions where people restrict their water usage based on how much it costs. And also, I understand our elected officials here think that we have a model with federal loans where we can fund the new water plant over time. But my guess is we're going to need more money at some point in the future. We're going to need more money because we'll need more redundancy, we'll need more money for maintenance, and the time to start basically reorienting our water system around a market-based model where we actually pay for what we're using is now, and we should probably have more increases than just 5% annually.
Well, certainly that got some reactions from you too, ladies.
Well, as a gardener, I am aware of the fact that the more water you use, the more it costs, and have done things over the years to reduce our use of water as much as possible for gardening and use it for household uses only. What I'm concerned about is the fact that it's taken this long for the city to wake up to the fact that now we're in a dire situation and it's a crisis, and it reduces the amount of choices or options that we have, and I find that very regrettable.
And I would agree. I'm glad that we're finally doing it. It took too long, but at least it's in progress now, in process now. But I'm curious, who would set the rates? I mean, how are you thinking statewide? I mean, this is a county issue or Wichita issue with our water rates. I mean, I'm trying to understand how that would work.
Well, this is a very difficult issue because of how we do American federalism. Because right now we have a situation where the water plant is run by the city of Wichita, but everybody else is dependent upon it. Now, you could bring everybody else in to setting the rates, collectively. But then the problem is you would put all these other municipalities on the hook for the bonding, and that's a problem too. And I'm sure everyone around here would be more than happy if you at the state level would come in with infrastructure funding, and I'm sure there would be a great argument for some kind of larger infrastructure fund. And frankly, we could borrow fairly cheaply to do that right now. But I think, as we heard from Medicaid expansion discussion earlier, you have some other things you're thinking about right now.
I don't think that's at the top of the list. But.
Yeah. And we're going to let that be the last word because we've got one more thing to talk about here. This weekend, the Wichita Police Department and other criminal justice leaders are holding a community-wide meeting to find out what's going on. Cake's Lacey William finds out more about what they want to know and how you can help.
Early Wednesday morning, police say Robert Ward poured gas on a rug outside of the entrance of this Presto gas station in West Wichita and started a fire. Investigators believe Ward may have been suffering from a mental health issue when the crime happened.
Public just understanding what law enforcement is actually tasked with, and a lot of times they're just not equipped to handle this, and they're doing the best job they have with a really complex situation.
Peter Neinmeyer works with the Caring Center in Wichita. He's a counselor and advocate for people struggling with mental health and substance abuse disorders.
The problem with what we have in our community and around the state is people with addiction issues, people with mental health issues who have no access to treatment.
That's why District Attorney Mark Bennett and other city and county leaders are holding a public meeting Saturday. They want help from the community.
And we want to change as much as anybody. We want to improve things.
The more we interact with our community and talk about struggles that we face both within the system and both that community members face, I think the better off we are for it.
Up for discussion, criminal justice concerns, major issues facing Wichita, the mental health crisis, and how law enforcement can help. Something Neinmeyer says is exactly what Wichita needs right now.
The communication is about education and understanding.
And this is something that politicians do. They call them town hall meetings.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
How useful can this be in setting agendas?
I've been involved in a meeting like that at the library fairly recently, and I think it is helpful to get feedback, to hear what people are saying, to understand. But the main thing I think it's really key is that our sheriff, our chief of police, and our DA are all together in wanting to do something in this issue. So I think with that group moving forward, hearing what the community wants, everybody should have a voice. And hopefully we can come up with some viable solutions. That's what we need.
Well, I go to a lot of neighborhood meetings and first got really interested in the mental health issue because I kept hearing from the police that are reporting to the neighborhood about crime in their neighborhood and so forth, what they're running into in terms of substance abuse and mental health issues. And we have a crisis in this community. I think the people in the neighborhoods know it, citizens know it, and this is a good opportunity for the criminal justice system folks, the mental health professionals and citizens to sit down together and look at where we need to go, what we need additionally in the city to address it, and come up with some ideas and listen to one another.
All right, and I've enjoyed listening to all three of you, Neil, Elizabeth, and Susan. Thank you so much for joining me. We'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, Cake News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion. We'd love to continue it online. Just look for Pilar Pedraza TV or KPTS Channel 8 on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. For now, have a great week.